Welcome to this first lecture, and today we're going to be looking at nurturing children and adults in the faith. We're going to be looking at three areas: catechizing children and adults, caring for children and adults, and caring for the carers. Now, in this Archdiocese, at the blessing and invitation of Sayyidina Silouan, I think this was 2 years ago, Sayyidina, the Archdiocesan Conference, a team was commissioned under my management to provide the Archdiocese with a resource. And that resource we wanted to call Come and See, but since it was already being used by another church, and since lawyers are always on the prowl, we decided to coin our own term, which was Followers, which is much the same kind of idea. And those of you who have seen the Followers website will understand what's going on there, but perhaps you can learn a little more and perhaps ask questions at the end. Those of you who don't know what Followers is, this will be an introduction now. It's www.followers-orthodox.com, which you can see there at the bottom of the screen. You might want to make a record of that. It's followers-orthodox.com. And this program is over 3 terms. It covers the ages 3 to 18, and there are 10 sessions in each segment. So altogether there will be, and nearly finished, 480 individual sessions for children and young people between the ages of 3 and 18. So there's the home page from the website, and you can see here at the top, it's very easy to navigate. 3 to 6 years, designated infants; 7 to 10 years, designated juniors; and 11 to 14 years, designated middles, with 15 to 18 designated seniors. And I want to thank all those people at the cathedral, Father Michel, and people in my parish and others who have worked to make this, I hope, a useful resource for our church. Also on the menu you will see that there are FAQs, frequently asked questions, how to use the course, the syllabus itself, further resources, and the team who have put it together. Now the important thing about this is that we want it to evolve, because when you give us feedback on how it's going for you, then we can add further resources, amend existing ones, substitute things that might work better from your own experience. I don't expect you to read all those individual words, it's not possible from the screen, but just to give you an idea of how the syllabus is set out. So here I've chosen seniors, just as an example. You've got here 4 age groups, 15, 16, 17 and 18. You've got 3 terms in the year for each age. You've got 10 sessions, so that's 30 in the full year for each age. And here you've got the actual content. And the way that we've numbered this is to use the same in 5s, split, as it were, a term split into 2 different modules, so that you get groups of 5 in each box. So there's 10 here for term 1, 10 here for term 2, 10 here for term 3 for each of the ages. And you can see that for seniors, under each theme of faith, worship, holiness, celebrations, Christian living and mission, you've got within that titles for each object of study, shall we say. So in faith, we've got here in St. Luke's Gospel, the Annunciation, the Centurion's Servant, the Good Samaritan, the Passion itself, the Road to Emmaus, the Resurrection Appearance. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can see now how the syllabus works. That's just to simplify it even further to show you the 6 topics and how they work through each of the 6 modules and 3 terms. Now, this is the lesson plan, and here I'm looking at teachers, Father Alexander and others, that I used in my final post before I started doing supply work when I was a secondary school teacher. So this is professionally up to date and remains so. Well, you can have your say when we come to the questions, Phoebe, okay? But it is certainly using every means of learning that we all possess in order to grapple with a life subject. And I say a life subject because here we want to integrate a child and a young person's experience of learning with worship and action of Christian discipleship. Okay? The way we learn, and this is work done by Dr. Gardner at Harvard University many years ago, can be described and categorized in different ways. This is not supposed to be a wooden and comprehensive exploration of the many different ways in which we learn. But basically, he suggested, although the terminology is slightly different, that we learn verbally. You're listening to me, or at least I hope you're listening to me. We learn through logical, deductive and inductive reasoning. So it's not just what we say, but it's what we read and how we make sense of what we read. We all, children and adults alike, some of us would prefer to learn in a spatial way. So using things like drawing and sculpture and the whole tradition of iconography would come under spatial. Okay? Kinesthetic, so you could say that's visual, but it's 2D, 3D, it's movement. Well, kinesthetic is movement. Kinesthetic, as it suggests, is movement. So, in our worship, of course, we use our bodies, because our bodies, no less than our souls, our minds and our spirits, are to be sanctified. Why not embrace that within the learning process? So for a child to learn how to venerate an icon, for example, becomes a vehicle of learning, for sure, about the icon itself and why we venerate and what we're doing and what we're not doing, but it becomes a lived encounter expressed through the body and in the soul and the heart for the child of an encounter with Christ, his mother and the saints. So the whole thing then becomes an integrated whole. Musical, of course, this goes without saying, that we love to sing. Teach the children, teach the young people to learn the Triparia, the Politikia of the church, and to sing them in great feasts. Bring them into the choir. Let them do a little solo, perhaps, at the end of the liturgy. Learn through singing. John Wesley said, a soul that sings prays twice. I think that's the quotation. And this is also part of our tradition. Intrapersonal means that our learning, okay, is a relational thing between the different members of the church. So, as surely as a child or as an adult learns, it learns that our Christianity is to be expressed in relationships with each other. For the supreme commandment is to love, and to love without measure, without condition, to love embracing sacrifice. All of this cannot be understood in terms of Christian formation without learning how to deal with, for example, difficult people. How do I make up with a friend that I've had an argument with at school? How do I deal with a child at home that's not responding to what I hope is good guidance? So this is where pastoral things come into learning. We cannot learn about love in an abstract way, in a conceptual way. We can only learn it through lived experience of relationships in the body of Christ. Interpersonal, so I've got the wrong way around. That's intrapersonal, that's right, sorry. Intrapersonal is within. So what I've just described to you is interpersonal. This is why you get mixed up with terms, it doesn't really matter. Intrapersonal, okay, means that which is within us. Sometimes people say it's the intranet, it means the in-house thing, yeah? So this is how the Holy Spirit works within us, through our repentance and our dedication to Christ, so that we become holy. May it please God, and by His grace. So intrapersonal learning means that we adopt the same method of teaching that Jesus himself did, and we can see this in the Sermon on the Mount. So that those Pharisees and other teachers who believed that they were not culpable of committing adultery were forced by Jesus to consider their inward intentions concerning lust, concerning people that were attractive. It's not just a question of what you do, It's a question of how you deal with your inner life, with your thoughts. And we can think of the fathers, the desert fathers, the ascetic fathers and mothers who have taught us how to deal with our inner life so that we become radiant. Remember, Abba Joseph said to Abba Lot, you can become all flame. Do we want our children and our adults to be infused with the Holy Spirit and to become all flame? Well, I hope that we do. Well, starting, of course, with ourselves. And finally, the natural world and the opportunities it offers us for learning. Okay, so how many parables of Jesus were concerned with growth? The mustard seed, the parable of the sower. These are very easy things, particularly for younger children, to use in order them to understand what Christ was saying in these parables, what lessons, practical lessons, he meant for our maturation and growth. We're suggesting that a session, this is not prescriptive, this is either helpful or not helpful, but to start with prayer. I think that's pretty basic, isn't it? Start a session with your children or your people with prayer. Have a starter, a so-called icebreaker, that will get them into the mode of learning through fun. There might be some simple point you're making with this. It might be about trust. You know, the old trust game. Stand in a line, catch the person in front of you. Be careful, health and safety. But you start with an icebreaker to get people receptive to the ideas that you're presenting in order to use their critical faculties and their emotional and their spiritual faculties to deal with the subject. And this really is just for the teacher. Always have in mind your learning objectives. What do I want and hope and pray that the people together before me that I'm caring for, what is my objective that they might learn existentially? If you look at the parables, they nearly all have one central point. Now, I know St. Augustine, in his commentary on the parable of the Good Samaritan, does what many of the fathers do, and ascribe to each character in the parable a certain correlation. For example, the innkeeper is the church, and the Good Samaritan is Christ, and those robbers who overtook the man were the devil, and so on and so forth. But actually, and that's fine, but actually the parable of the Good Samaritan revolves around one central point, which is the question asked of Jesus right at the beginning. And who is my neighbour? And who is my neighbour? So, have your learning objective to understand who is my neighbour. Just a simple reminder to you of what you're really driving towards. Core activities and learning. I've squashed these a little to get them on the screen. We make suggestions there about things that you can do together using the multiple intelligences from Gardner and the way in which the lesson can proceed. One of the pitfalls of any teacher, and I'm sort of keeping my eye on my watch, is to overrun, is to try and cram too much in. It's very much more the error of those rather than those perhaps who might not put enough in, because the children themselves, the young people themselves will give you plenty of material to fill a session. All right? Don't think this is what I have to cram into them and then panic when you're running over. Remember what the learning objective is, have a few key activities, and to a certain extent, and this goes really with experience in the task, go with the flow. If a child or a young person wants to go off on a tangent, you may think they're wandering from the script, they're not learning what I want them to learn. How can you make that judgment? By all means control it, but be prepared to be flexible, because that child or young person may bring something up that may appear to you tangential, but which is actually quite on the point. Finally, resources. This is just so you know where to look. We put icons on the site, we make suggestions about worksheets, we include worksheets, we include fun activities, word searches, things like this, crosswords. Review. Okay? You're going to review whether you have met that learning objective. What were the problems associated with fulfilling that in that lesson? How might improvements might be made? You may then have a good idea how this lesson might be improved. What do you do next? That's a question. What do you do next? I'm not going to speak. What do you do next? Tell me. Put your hand up and tell me. You found something that could be improved. What do you do?
Improve it.
Improve it. Thank you. It's not rocket science. You improve it. You change it. But then what do? You tell the team. You send me an email and say, actually, in trying to deliver this lesson, it's not worked very well. This did work. Would you consider putting it on the website? We'll look at it and say, almost certainly. We'll say, great, yeah, fine. And I'll change it. So this will continue to be a work in progress years ahead. But only if you interact with the material and give us that feedback so that we can improve it. You may find a wonderful resource. We're going to put that in the lesson when you tell us. Okay? Follow-up. Okay? This enables you and the children and the young people to look forward to the next session and to see how the next session connects with the present one. So that there is a dynamic process of learning going on, so that not only each lesson has an objective, but each module and each term has an objective. Multiple intelligences. I don't intend to spend long on this because I'm probably already running. And if you give me your email, or perhaps I can get this from Father Paulinus, I can send you this PowerPoint, and you can have it as a resource to look at in more detail. But this is what Gardner, using slightly different terminology, this is what Gardner discovered through his long research into how people learn. What doesn't work? Right, snap through this. What doesn't work? One size fits all. In other words, the same course, the same length, and the same expectations. The cognitive, intellectual, and educational capacities of the children in your care will vary, depending on who is in the cohort. It may vary in the light of the kind of educational provision in the area. I'm not saying that this is about schoolwork, but obviously certain basic competences which schools hope to impart to their young charges may be better or less well realised in your area. So one size does not fit all. Individually designed provision based on existing knowledge and experience, temperament, that's the personality of your children, their capacities, their gifts for understanding, practice and personal history. So an effective lesson must always have that responsiveness to the subject who learns. Talking heads. Sorry, this is adults, but it applies as much to children, I think. Talking heads. This is the very worst kind of learning. Precisely what I am doing now. Talking head. Head, talking. Worst form of learning. Sitting people down. I mean, if this wasn't Sunday school, let's just assume it was something like this. But, you know, you've got everybody there, they've got a captive audience, you've got a speaker, and he or she stands up and speaks for 2 hours, and then is puzzled why people start sleeping at the back, and then the wave of somnolescence moves to the front. Do you remember that wonderful account in the Acts of the Apostles where the young man is sitting in the window, and St. Paul, bless him, I'm not being disrespectful, obviously was going on and on and on and on, and oh, he might have just been tired in the heat of the day. And the poor lad falls out of the window, and they rush round, and he's well, and he's okay. Okay. Talking heads ain't good. It's lazy educational practice. Okay? Remember what we said about how people learn, not just through hearing, verbal, spatial, kinesthetic, intrapersonal, interpersonal, musical, nature. Where are all those if it's only talking heads? Disconnected teaching. This is very important. Orthodoxy without orthopraxy. Right belief and worship, but without right action and response. This is a monstrosity, isn't it? If you go onto Facebook, people bang on about orthodoxy. How often do they bang on about orthopraxy? And by that I don't mean, oh yes, have I fasted in exactly the right way in the last week? It means, am I getting to grips with how fasting can actually transform my life by the grace and operation and power of the Holy Spirit. What is my spiritual father or mother saying about this? Or am I just a legalist and I tick all the boxes because I've done all that's required of me? That's not orthopraxy. Orthopraxy is theosis. It's growing to be divinized into the image and likeness of God, in which we were made to achieve our full human potential by God's grace. That's what connected teaching is, which is why our teaching of children can never be intellectual, theoretical, or abstract, or indeed adults. Now, I must tell you that the Roman Catholic Church is significantly ahead of us at the moment in terms of reviving the catechumenate. There are many who make justified criticisms of the rite of Christian initiation of adults, the so-called RCIA program, but what it actually does is put before us what happened in antiquity in the early church before the catechumenate began to go into decline. It never went into total decline, but it certainly did from the 5th or 6th century onwards become a less important thing for the catechizing as adults, as more children were being baptized by parents who were able now to be Christians, whereas during times of persecution it was more problematic. But with the revival of the catechumenate in mission areas, we need to go back, as RCIA has done, to understand what happened in the early church. The RCIA program makes one big omission, and that is the scrutinies. More of that in a moment. In the documentation of the fathers and catechists of the early church, there were 4 stages. That of being an inquirer, that of being a catechumen, once enrolled, then the actual process of instruction, which was not, of course, theoretical and abstract, but a matter of conversion, of purification, of enlightenment, the classical 3-fold stage and process of Christian formation. And then, usually, but not always, after baptism, the mystagogy. The catechetical lectures of St. Jerusalem introduce much of the teaching concerning the sacraments after baptism, so that initiation becomes the beginning of a lifelong process, not some sort of passing out ceremony. It's a passing in mystery to the heart and life of the church. So there is a considerable degree, to my mind at least, of profound wisdom in delaying some of the teaching, particularly about the sacraments, about the holy mysteries, until after baptism. People have different opinions on that. So this corresponds to evangelization. This, before people actually convert and repent and say, I want to be a catechumen. This corresponds to catechesis itself. Then you have the stage of prayer and discernment. And then you have the actual ongoing formation after baptism. And throughout this, the scrutinies. Well, what were the scrutinies? Let's just go through this first. The enrollment of the catechumen, I referred to that. The exorcisms. Now, the exorcisms, if you don't mind me saying, are not to be omitted in baptism. Do you agree? Put you on the spot. I'm in saying, really, that even if you do them quietly, I stand to be corrected. The exorcisms are in the baptism service for a reason. Not that children, babies, toddlers need exorcising, but we use the same rite because it's the same covenant. But certainly with adults, they are applicable. We don't want people to be in the grip of evil and of Satan and his minions. We want people to be liberated from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of light. Why would we leave them out? Because they upset people? Do we make decisions based on whether it upsets people? Get thee away to thine own Tartarus. People need to hear it. How much, if you look at the Gospels, of Jesus' ministry and message is to do with deliverance. It doesn't mean we have to go all freaky and chase demons under every stone and abuse people psychologically, but we do need to recognize, as St. Paul says, we do not contend against flesh and blood, but against dominions, principalities and powers. Baptism is an astringent deliverance from everything that opposes the will of God. Why in baptism do we turn to the west and say blow and spit? Oh, that can be terribly English. We don't want to blow and spit. No, blow and spit. Why do Muslims on the Hajj throw stones at the pillar on the Hajj? Does anybody know? Huh? Yes, as Abraham resisted Satan, in the context of the sacrifice, they get the eyes a bit wrong, don't they, with Ishmael? But it's the same kind of thing. Where did they get that from? Us. Oh no, it upsets people. Oh. Right. Metanoia and the creed. It's not enough to repent. It is central. But having repented and starting to live by faith, they need now to learn the faith. This is a distinction which must not be divided, faith and the faith. We cannot accede to the common Western error that all it really matters is individual faith. However, an individual might define that. The creed is the faith of the church. And that's why, of course, the Nicene Creed occurs after the metanoia in the liturgy of the catechumens and the preface to baptism. Scrutinies then and now. I'm going to read this, it's important. In the early church, exorcisms and the scrutinies were separate events celebrated sometimes on a daily basis. One of the early documents, called the Apostolic Tradition, notes that the catechumen's conduct was examined at a time just before their baptism. After this examination, the bishop laid hands daily on the catechumens and led prayers of exorcism over them until their baptism. Today, the patterns of preparation may have changed, but some investigation of an adult's life and conduct is vitally necessary. Some catechumens, for example, are not aware that certain professions and actions are incompatible with being a baptized Orthodox Christian. Performing abortions, belonging to the lodge, Freemasonry, and receiving sacraments elsewhere come to mind. How are people going to know that this is not possible for the Orthodox, and to know why these things are not possible for the Orthodox unless they're taught? And the scrutinies are an essential part of discerning whether or not a person is ready to be baptized. Many years ago, a Freemason, this was right at the beginning of my ministry in St. David's as an Orthodox priest, presented himself to me and said, "Father, I know all the problems about Masonry in relation to the Orthodox Church, but I assure you it's not going to come between me and Christ. I believe in our Lord Jesus Christ. I believe in the redemption and in the resurrection. I affirm the faith of the Church. But I would ask you not to prevent me from continuing in my life as a Freemason. I made a grave error, and I learnt from my error." I said, "Okay." He was already baptized in another church, and I received him by chrismation. Within 2 years, he heard, after his wife died, I'm not saying anything I shouldn't say publicly, because nobody knows who this is, he had, without my knowledge, gone to Cyprus, into an Anglican church, served by a Freemason priest, a Freemason Anglican priest, and conducted a second marriage with Freemasonry bits added into the service. He came back and never came to my church again. It is so seductive to say, "Oh, well, it's okay. You've promised to follow Christ. You've promised to give unswerving allegiance to our Holy Church, and what she teaches as received from God." But actually, that man could have been better helped by me by saying, "No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry." It's part of the scrutinies, as you see. "I'm sorry. Let's continue to work at this, but I cannot receive you into the church while you continue to practice Freemasonry." This also has implications, I'm going to hand over to Helen now, for the safeguarding of children and vulnerable adults. The church has a gate into our communities for a purpose. To safeguarding we shall now turn. What I want to suggest to you is, you may think, what are you doing this safeguarding and thing about catechesis? But I hope I've shown that this is a holistic thing, education, and it must concern a person's morality and conduct in as much as it also concerns the faith. So how we care for children and adults is a vital part of the educational process, as Helen will now show.
Which is more of a technical part, but never mind.
That's fine.
I know we all think we know our congregations, and it can never happen to us. It only takes one person to raise an issue with something that someone has allegedly said to a child or a relative of an adult, say a vulnerable adult, to have concerns over a visit when you've been to see them, and you and your church will end up being the subject of a complaint, or could do anyway, and this has to be investigated by the Archdiocese and its insurers, maybe the authorities and even the Charity Commission. It spirals out of control. And it's not worth the risk to either your or your church's reputation for you not to be aware of the potential issues. We've all got to start taking safeguarding more seriously, and we currently do anyway, for the following reason. Listen, a range of Christian denominations will be the focus of a new investigation by the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse. This is sponsored by the Home Office. And this inquiry will also explore child protection practices in a variety of settings to include, as they've said in their website, Christian Sunday schools and places where children and young people gather in connection with their religious beliefs, including youth groups and camps. I'm going to read you some extracts from a statement recently written by Justin Humphreys. He's the Chief Exec at 318. That's the agency we use for all our safeguarding checks. It's in relation to this child abuse inquiry. A couple of the extracts are on the screen. It's not very long to read. It's not a surprise that the inquiry should turn its focus towards a broader representation of the Church. This is exactly what happened in Australia through the Royal Commission, and it is something that I've been warning church and denominational leaders in the UK about for some years. Whilst many churches and denominations have since worked hard to openly learn about their past failings to improve current and future child protection practice, many have not. The new investigation is one of 14 currently within the scope of the independent inquiry and will commence with a preliminary hearing in July this year and public hearings in next year in 2020. Its objectives will be to explore levels of understanding, training provision, policies and procedures, safer recruitment, responses to allegations and disclosures, internal audit and review mechanisms, compliance with statutory guidance and external oversight. In real terms, this thematic investigation will call upon denominational and religious leaders and others to make available to the inquiry the details of their efforts and arrangements to protect children. It is likely also that some key figures will be called to give evidence to assist in the inquiry and with its deliberations. This is a wake-up call. The Church is not beyond scrutiny, and to continue thinking so is dangerous. We must engage with these investigations constructively for the good of our children, past, present and future, and to assist in the safe creation of safer places. So, following on from that, back to our own Archdiocese. We all have, or should have, one of these posters displayed in our churches, so everybody knows who to go to. You notice it states that we, as an Archdiocese, are committed to following government guidelines on working with children and vulnerable adults. If you haven't got one of these posters in your church, I've got some with me, so let me know and I'll give you a copy. So, what can I do? We all have a responsibility, and for once it pays to be nosy. It's lovely to have new people turning up at church, especially ones who want to help. And before we let them loose, though, on our children's group, find out a bit about them. Have a chat, find out where they've been, what they want to do. Be nosy, a bit like me, really. And don't leave them to themselves. If they want to help with existing groups, don't leave them by themselves. Just make sure you've got an existing, trusted adult with them. Now, I'm not suggesting that anybody and everybody is put under suspicion. No, it sounds like that, but we just all need to be vigilant. Some people are saying, oh, well, it's going all too politically correct. You can't say or do anything anymore. Anyway, it is slightly true, but there are real issues. Everyone is more savvy about their rights, or what they think their rights are anyway, most of the time. And whether they're misguided or not, this can cause an awful lot of work, unwelcome publicity, heartache and a few sleepless nights for those involved. So, it doesn't apply to us. I know we're not panto season yet, but oh yes it does. Have you considered every occasion children and vulnerable adults interact with other adults in your congregation? You've got Sunday school being the obvious one. And even if you have some parents sitting in, the Sunday school teacher and helpers should have undertaken a safeguarding check. The only time I'd say it probably wasn't necessary would be if every child's own parent or legal guardian was with them at all times during Sunday school. Well, that's not really that practical. So we're erring on the side of caution. I'd strongly recommend that all Sunday school teachers in your churches undertake the check. What about other children's groups? Creches? Those children's groups are not necessarily held on a Sunday. Have all the leaders been checked? What about taking children on trips where not every parent will be attending? There are authority forms, risk assessment forms. You name it, there's a form for it. But they all need to be completed before a trip's undertaken. You can't just wander off with them on a whim. Your choir. Do you have children in the choir? The choir leader, and possibly one other adult, should, take out holidays, sickness, whatever, needs to have a safeguarding check. Altar servers. Well, they may have your subdeacons, your readers, priests and deacons, very full altar, but they may have all undertaken a safeguarding check. But you may have servers, or one or two of them, and they may supervise or instruct or discipline the children in the altar. They need a check. Now, I not only said children in this, but a lot of it also applies to those vulnerable adults as well, so you can quote them like one for the other. Now, you may say some of our congregation have already undertaken safeguarding checks. And it's fine, providing that the DBS certificate is in the form of what's called a portable certificate, meaning it can be used by a different group, providing it's for the same job that they're doing. So if they're a teacher, probably get away with it if they're a Sunday school teacher. We can use it, but only if it's portable. If not, we have to do our own because we have to comply with safeguarding procedures. And then a new safeguarding checks undertaken. So, safeguarding checks. Now you know I'm pestering you all so much to get these checks done. As a parish and an archdiocese, it's not worth taking the chance with the authorities and the Charity Commission. Not only to protect ourselves and our children as much as possible. So without exception, all priests, deacons, subdeacons and readers have to undertake a safeguarding check. But however, whilst these safeguarding checks are important, they're only up to date at the point of issue by the Disclosure Service, and only pick up anything where people have been caught. So if you're clever, you've got away with it, call it clever. A DBS check's no guarantee that person has not done anything wrong, but at least it's a good starting point for us. So I must remind you also that safeguarding checks are to be completed before the person takes up the role, not as an afterthought. And also let me know. I don't have to want to troll through Facebook or parish newsletters just to find out the information. It does take a bit more time for me to do that, and I should be told before they start the job that they're going to be doing in your churches. So just email me with the contact details, let the person know I'm going to be contacting them, and I'll take it from there. There's very little else you would need to do on that. Regulatory requirements. So as a charity, we must comply with the regulatory requirements as set by the Charity Commission. It's not an optional extra. And our own Archdiocesan policy includes a section on safeguarding. And this policy is on the Archdiocesan website, and anyone who has weekly contact with children or vulnerable adults in their parish must undergo the safeguarding check. Quite painless, doesn't take very long. But then, what if the worst happens? You receive a complaint from someone about a member of your congregation, or even the clergy. Don't try and deal with it yourself. Contact either me or Father Gregory. I'll help you and guide you through the process, as the investigation will have to be completed by the Archdiocese, but it's for your protection, or your priest or member of your congregation's protection, not just the person making the complaint. If you're a parish charity, you should have purchased an insurance policy to cover such eventualities. We do have an Archdiocesan policy which also provides some cover if necessary. Now, for one priest in our Archdiocese recently, he's given his permission for us to discuss this. We're not saying who it is, but he has given us permission. The worst did happen. Myself and Father Gregory received a complaint, a phone call one night. We're on the phone a couple of hours. We've had to follow Archdiocesan safeguarding procedures. We notified our insurers. We dealt with the complaint. Luckily, the allegations were unfounded and the complaint was rejected. but not exactly pleasant for him, and a few sleepless nights for the priests concerned. Then we've gone to the practical bit, which is the next bit. How it's all changing and becoming not so much more formal, but at least a proper procedure, rather than how we thought it would work. Because our priest has recently been a bit of a guinea pig. Because until we have the actual complaint, you don't quite know how it's going to work. You've got your ideas, and you know this is going to work like this, but until you've actually got someone to fit in all the gaps, you don't know. So we obviously notified the insurers, and they were happy with our procedures, and we've now sort of fine-tuned them a bit so that it does actually work practically. So briefly, the following procedure is how any complaint, whether about a priest or a parishioner, will be dealt with in the future. The investigation team, as it's called, is on the screen. So it's myself, Father Gregory, Father Xander and Father Alban Campbell. And I'll email all the priests and the local safeguarding reps just to tell them the procedures shortly. But it's going to work in this way. So regardless of how it's received, the complaint may be verbal. Could be somebody may just go to the priest and say, look, don't like what they said, and a long story about it. But we have to know straight away. It may even be notified direct to us because it was about a priest, so we received the phone call straight away. So we'll get a written statement as we did and find out both sides of the story, as it were. We'll have to inform, obviously, the insurers, and if it's of a criminal nature, then we have to inform all the various authorities. And that, unfortunately, then the priest or parishioner will be suspended from any of their duties until the investigation's concluded. If it's not of a criminal nature, as this one wasn't, the investigation team, comprising of us four, will review the information that's been received, notify the insurers, or the parish will notify their insurers. If they need help from me, I'll help them. And we'll conduct a preliminary investigation with that person who has had the complaint raised against them. This should take approximately 2 weeks. This includes getting insurers' confirmation that they accept the complaint and approve any responses to send the complainant. If, when we've completed the preliminary investigation, we consider it's completely unfounded and the person is not at fault that's being complained about, they can just continue in their role as before. If it isn't probably shaky at that point, but they can carry on as they were. But if we consider it's not that clear cut and we need a bit more investigation beyond the 2 weeks, the person will be suspended from their duties until such time the investigation is complete and the matter has been considered either by a seminary or by an ecclesiastical court. We'll be reporting to him and with a recommendation after all due process. The person will then either be exonerated, hopefully, or if removed from their post. Now, if there's a criminal matter, we've got to follow those procedures as well. We have to go by, obviously, the authorities. We can make our own mind up, but we've also got to follow those police and various other authorities. Now, there's a chance that when we've rejected the complaint, and the complainant won't agree with our decision. And for my job, I find complainants rarely agree with any decision, especially if it's not the one they want. And they'll pursue this further. At that point, we'll have to review the matter again, especially if there's new evidence or allegations provided. And this may then lead to the suspension of the person from the role. Now, insurers will often keep their files open for about 6 months or so, until they can be reasonably confident that the matter's gone away and won't be pursued further. So far, in this recent case we've had, nothing's been heard since we rejected a complaint a few weeks ago, and let's hope it continues that way. We think it will, but who knows? You never know. So, finally, those of us old enough to remember Dad's Army, don't panic. It's not the end of the world. You might feel it when you get the complaint, but it's not the end of the world. Most of them are completely unfounded, but they all have to be treated the same, involving me, the Archdiocese, so don't attempt to deal with it yourself. It won't go away, and it could make matters worse. If we don't get insurers' approval of things, it can prejudice the cover, and if it does go against us, that could be a lot of money for your parish that you have to pay out, whether you want to or not. So that's the point, don't ignore it. But on a positive note, following the recent case, there's going to be additional training for priests, the local safeguarding reps, and all those who've undertaken safeguarding checks to ensure we know what we're looking out for those in our care, and how to protect ourselves, and hopefully avoid any other potential incidents. Father Gregory will explain about the training, how it's going to work shortly. Just I recently saw in the news, and it was the Church Times recently, that an Anglican bishop has been suspended whilst an investigation to safeguarding issues takes place. It appears it's not him that's being accused, but he's allegedly not been adequately safeguarding those in his care. So we may not be at fault of actually doing anything wrong, but we've got to prepare and look after everybody that we're supposed to be looking after. Now I know I've painted a picture of doom and gloom, and no one's to be trusted until that trust is earned. But unfortunately, it's the world we've now come to live in, and there's no escaping it anymore. But by doing what we can to create a safe environment for our children and the vulnerable adults, means that we can enjoy fellowship with one another, knowing that our children are safe and we know a bit more about the people. So following this, if there's anyone here, you've got people who've not had a safeguarding check, but following that you think, well, maybe they do, have a word with me. You know where I am at the back there, with our new bookstore member, little Alexander, who's looking after the books for me. So I've got some forms with me. So, and also if you want to speak to Subdeacon James from Doncaster, he deals with all the safeguarding there, and he's up to date on what everything's done, how to make sure people are checked and where I am to be found. So, and also to the priests, the parish priests, I did send you email you some forms with all the people I think have been checked, had a DBS check. I need them back before you go, please, today. Well, tomorrow before you go. And I've got some with me if you've forgotten them. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you.
Right, the training, ongoing learning, safeguarding and pastoral care. This won't take long. Since 1995, I'm going to read this, there have been 4 serious complaints made against clergy in this archdiocese, a few of which could have come before the courts, criminal, civil or ecclesiastical, but did not, either because there was, quote, insufficient evidence or no evidence. These are terms that are used by the Crown Prosecution Service. The last happened, as Helen has said, 6 weeks ago. And it was pretty difficult for those of us dealing with it, with Saidon. Of course, Saidon's involved in the process all the way along. But it was resolved, hopefully, but as Helen said, 6 months is the usual period for which the case is kept open by insurers. In some of these cases, the clergy concerned might have better protected themselves. Right? Might have better protected themselves by safer pastoral practices that did not make them so vulnerable. One thing that our pastoral consultant, Father Alban Campbell, because this is his profession in the NHS, is keen to point out all the time is establish boundaries. Just because somebody's saying, help, 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 oh yes, 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 yes. As soon as you do that, you're being manipulated. Right? Help, but on your terms. What to do? Improve our awareness of these issues and learn better practice. Improve significantly the support we give to clergy and church workers active in the area of pastoral care. Don't put this all on Saedna's shoulders. The support that we give one another has to happen first of all in the communities, monastic or parish. It's all our responsibility. We are responsible for each other. Our salvation lies in our brother or our sister. Seek not for whom the bell tolls, John Donne, it tolls for thee. Okay, so support matters, and particularly dealing with wounded people. Because what you may think is good for them may not be what the church actually has established through centuries of good pastoral practice. You need to learn about these things if you're a church worker or a priest. And that training, in the light of contemporary insights and modern research, is an ongoing aspect of good pastoral ministry. It starts with recognizing that we ourselves are all wounded. I'm wounded. I struggled with anxiety for much of my life. This is not a kind of heart confession thing, but I want to establish the credibility of what I'm saying by being honest with you. And I know what a struggle that has been with me since I was young. But by God's grace and by the help of my brothers and sisters, I can, in the early stages, manage it. And now I think I've transcended it to some extent. But I know that it will be with me, probably, except that God intervenes, until I die. It's not something I fret about, because when I know I need help, I go get it. And perhaps it's a stereotype, but perhaps there is a kind of male-female thing going on here, you know, oh, men are expected to be self-contained and resilient and not cry and all the other nonsense. And we know it's nonsense, but we all need to recognise our vulnerability, because when we're dealing with wounded people, sometimes our reactions are distorted by our own woundedness and sin and frailty. So it's a matter of, you know, personal spiritual growth as well as a relational thing for the people that we care for. We do need to do more to study and learn best practice in a verifiable way. Training, learning and mutual support must be ongoing and consistent. I'm not Orthodox seminary trained, but we have two here who are. I would just ask you, as part of seminary training in Orthodox churches, you with the OCA, of course, Father, and you, of course, in the Church of Antioch, Saidna, does this constitute an ongoing aspect of training of clergy in seminaries? How to deal with difficult people, for example. Did you have any treatment of this in your seminary?
No, and I regret it. I had to learn the hard way.
Yeah. Sometimes, I won't ask you the question, sometimes, relax. Sometimes there is an attitude in some seminaries, and it was certainly true in the Church of England. It's interesting for you to say no as well. My former role. Sometimes there is this attitude, well, they need to know how to serve the liturgy, they need to know the Bible, they need to know the Fathers, that's it. No. No. The training must be ongoing and consistent. Now, the Archdiocese has a safeguarding policy which all parishes are obliged to adopt and follow. Ongoing training is an integral part of this policy. The policy document is at the top of the Archdiocesan website. It's quite clearly visible right along the top on the home page. Please refer to it regularly, because with Saidna's supervision and guidance, we are continuing to improve and to develop it, to make it more responsive to actual practical situations. Please remember that safeguarding checks are required for all those ordained as readers, subdeacons, deacons and priests, along with choir directors, as Helen has said. And as she has emphasised, these checks are to be completed before the person takes up their role, or before they are ordained, not afterwards. Now, the Archdiocese has a new online affordable training programme which all communities are now obliged to join and fulfil. And I asked, obviously, Saidna for his blessing to roll this out to you now. So what is this training programme? The training programme is specifically designed by Christians for Christians, and has been designed by what used to be called CCPS. Helen has said that the new branding is 31A, and comes from Proverbs 31:8 and verse 9. Oh, this is Septuagint, of course. Open your mouth for the word of God, and judge all men fairly. Open your mouth and judge righteously, and plead the cause of the poor and the helpless. Plead the cause of the poor and the helpless. That is the mandate of the organisation that we use to do our safeguarding checks and to receive training for good policy and in accordance with law. Now, there are two courses. The main course is for all clergy and all local safeguarding officers. The cost is £55. This is an online course, multiple choice questions, tick, tick, tick. 50% will be subsidised by the deanery, by the diocese, okay? 50%, so we'll only charge you £27.50. The length is about an hour and a half to 2 hours. I did it the other night and I did it in an hour and a half. Okay? There are 4 videos of about 10 to 15 minutes each, and then 10 questions that follow with multiple choice answers. You have to get at least 80% to pass each unit. If you don't pass it, if you fall below 80%, you go back to the beginning and do it again until you do get at least 80%. So the objective is not to pass or fail you, the objective is to pass everybody, so that at the end of the process you get a certificate of compliance, a certificate of training. Saidna said to me, how do you know that they've all done it? I said to him with a twinkle in my eye. It's because you have to give us the certificate that you get when you've completed it. Other courses. We encourage parishes to seek out for their own further learning opportunities, and subsidies may be available. So if you see a good course locally concerning safeguarding, all you've got to do is let us know. We have a discussion about that, say Edna blesses it or doesn't accordingly, and then we help you to complete it. Can we leave the question to the end, Father? Yeah, that's right, I'm nearly finished.
That's the short course, Annie.
Oh, and the short course. The short course is for all those who have actually had a safeguarding check, okay? It's a shorter thing, as it suggests, and it's only 10 quid, but you have to pay that. We're not going to subsidise that. Right, and finally, as from January 2000, hopefully again, this has the Bishop's blessing, we're adding an extra and final module to the Equip course, which everybody who is being ordained, or who wishes to do the diploma, will now also have to do. Pastoral care in the Orthodox Christian tradition. Bring out to send this to your former seminary, Father. You might be already doing it. The sacramental dimensions of pastoral care. Pastoral care as a diaconia for parish members. Service, yes? Pastoral care as outreach in the community. How do we care for people who are poor and who have no voice, for Proverbs 31:9, in the community? It's not just in the household of faith, is it? Pastoral care for the bereaved. Pastoral care and Christian counselling. Pastoral care and mental health. Pastoral care and addictions. Pastoral care and safeguarding. Pastoral care and wounded people. Just take a moment to look at those. I think that just about covers the territory that we've been looking at today. Okay? You'll notice that we started by talking about catechizing. We end by talking about how we care for those who catechize and those who have been catechized. Christian poet, not Orthodox, but in many ways very close to that. In happier times, perhaps, for the Church of England when it was closer to Orthodoxy at the beginning of the 20th century. T.S. Eliot, very famous Christian poet. The Wounded Surgeon from the Four Quartets, East Coker. This is a wonderful poem, and I've often used it in sermons. The wounded surgeon plies the steel that questions the distempered part. Beneath the bleeding hands, we feel the sharp compassion of the healer's art, resolving the enigma of the fever chart. Our only health is the disease, if we obey the dying nurse, whose constant care is not to please, but to remind of our and Adam's curse, and that to be restored, our sickness must grow worse. The dripping blood our only drink, the bloody flesh our only food, in spite of which we like to think that we are sound, substantial, flesh and blood. Again, in spite of that, we call this Friday good. I finish now, Father.